There's several ways that you can create a base mesh. It may be the fact that you've already got a base mesh. There's no reason why you even have to create a base mesh from scratch because there's so many free ones about. The reason why I'm creating my own base mesh is because I want to have complete control right from the very beginning. And to be quite honest, once you've understood the basic tools within ZBrush, you're going to be able to make a base mesh very, very quickly. What I'm using to create a base mesh within ZBrush is what's called Z-spheres. And it's a way of basically having these building blocks you can see here that create the forms and shapes that you're after, which later gets turned into what's called an adaptive skin, which is basically a polygon model. What you need to do is you need to first draw a Z-sphere onto the screen, as you can see here, and then activate symmetry, which is the X key. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go through the history of me building a basic Z-sphere model so you can see this, and I'm going to stop it to explain a little bit about what I'm doing. The first thing that I'm doing is I'm going to be treating this first Z-sphere as the chest. Some people will actually start with a Z-sphere as the head. I wouldn't recommend that. I prefer to start from the middle and then work my way out. So you can see here that I've created a T shape here, and this would be representing the shoulders, as you can see highlighted in green, and this is part of the torso going down the abdomen. Fast forward a little bit, you can see here now that I've got the torso, just very basic, this is from the side, and we've got the upper arm there. The good thing about Z-spheres is you can create a pose within the initial model right away, a bit of gesture. What you can see I've done here, we're looking from the top view, this is where the neck's going to eventually be, but I just want you to notice how I've created this slant here either side, and this is actually looking from the top view, and I'm looking at the scapula, okay, your shoulder blade in common terms. So your shoulder blade then links into your shoulder, you can see here, and then of course the arms are coming off of this. So we've got this shoulder. The reason why there's a slight slant on the scapula is because the scapula is actually wrapping around your rib cage, and if you was to look from somebody from above, you would see that this is the case. A lot of people may be creating the initial base mesh, whether it is in another program or even within ZBrush, they may create it more like there's the torso, and we're looking from above view here, and then we've got the shoulders that come out like that. Okay, that's wrong. By doing this, you're essentially placing the shoulders dead in the middle between the torso. When you look from the side view of this, you'll notice that there's the chest as an example, there's the back, and there's my shoulders. The shoulders are more forward in that direction than it is to the back, and that is because the shoulders are tilted forwards off the spine of the scapula, which is here, and then we've got the shoulder blade. So there's just some things that you need to take into consideration even at the lowest stages, as you can see here. So I'm creating the arms, the neck and the head. I want you to notice from the side view here how I'm creating a S-curve in the body, and the S-curve is basically coming from the skeleton. The skeleton, when it's got weight on top of it and it's standing up, it will generally balance itself out onto the floor, and the way it does is it by allowing the body to fold up in certain areas. So you can see here that the neck is jetting forwards, and then we've got the torso jetting back, and then when we go into the abdomen and into the pelvic region, then it's going to be tilting forwards. And if you join these up, what you get is you get what's called an S-curve. And S-curves are found throughout the whole entire human body, not just down the torso, but throughout the entire human body. And it's a way of basically getting balance throughout the body, and it creates some lovely gestures throughout the form. And if your torso or your body is too straight, then the character doesn't look alive at all. In fact, it looks as though it doesn't weigh anything at all. So these are kind of the things I want to get straight into there right away. And we just go forward a little bit. Again, you can see here that I've got this pelvis is tilting. If we were to put it into a box, the torso is tilting back, and the neck is tilting forwards, and then of course the head is balancing on top of that. This is the SFlow, and what you'll find is for females is that the pelvis will tilt down more, have much more of a tilt than what a male has. And what this basically essentially creates is it creates a nice V shape in the back when you're looking from a 3/4 view, especially when you've got some masses out there. Okay, so when you've got the masses on here, you'll see this typically on a female when you're looking for a 3/4 view, that it will dip into the lower back and then it will come out here. We're looking for these forms all over the body, not just the side view or the front view, but there's many of them. And if you take time to understand these flows that are throughout the body and what's causing them, then you're going to be able to get gesture into your model very, very quickly. So let's just move on with this history now. We're going to go forwards, and we just come out of there, creating the fingers. And we'll go right to the very end when I've created this Z-sphere model. And this is very, very basic. You can create much more complex ones, but this will get me what I'm after in the long run of things. Now, I haven't obviously measured out any limb lengths or anything like that, but through perception over time of using Canon systems, I know it's roughly the height that I want it, which I will explain about that in a minute. But for the most part, other than the shins, should be a little bit longer than that. It's roughly where I need it. And just to some of the things that I'm kind of looking for I'm just looking at, or should I say I'm picking up the overall head size. You can't go too much by that at the moment, but I'm just looking at the length of the limbs. I know that the forearm, the lower limb, is going to be longer than the upper arm when it's fleshed out. I know that roughly 2 head heights should be where the kneecap is. Okay, so they're just kind of things that I look at. I can see there instantly, like I just said a minute ago, that the shins need to be longer, because clearly you can see the head doesn't fit within that. So I've got a few things that I kind of bring into the equation when I'm creating a Z-sphere model. I'm using anatomy in the preconceived mind of what I'm doing right the way from the beginning, in the gesture, the pose, the form, and I would even go as far as moving some of these gestures, but it's not too important at this stage. But you can certainly push these gestures much more further than what I have. You can see there. Anyway, once you've created your basic model, what you can go on to do after that is you can create a adaptive skin, and the adaptive skin essentially gives you the polygon model you can see here. And then once you've got the polygon model, it's the case of then just using the move tools, not sculpting, just the move tools, to pull out the forms, to pull them out and push them into place. Of course, you can't pull out forms if you don't know what you're pulling out, and this is when the understanding of anatomy really comes in. You need to know what forms to pull out. If I was to backtrack on this, you can see where it starts from the Z-sphere stage, which is right here. You can clearly see I'm pulling out these forms of the female figure, and some of these forms are just generally down to general anatomy that is both male and female, and some of them are definitely more emphasized for the female. I'm not going to go into too much of this in this particular video, but I just wanted to go to a later stage in which I can show you some of these things that I kind of pointed out, I want to point out. So some of these forms obviously is the fact that we've got to have proportions. The proportions of the limbs have to be right. There's no point putting anatomy in until you've got the proportions right. The proportions are always going by how they sit between each individual limb. So for instance, the head has to be the right scale for the torso, as to the upper arm, to the lower arm. All the limbs have to be in proportion to each other. This has nothing to do with gesture or rhythm in the body itself. It's just to do with the length of the limbs. And of course, if you're going to be using a Cannon system, if you're a beginner, you really want to learn a Cannon system, because it will help you bridge the gap between not knowing nothing and having something in place in which you can say, this is the average ideal, and if I go too far out the average ideal, then it doesn't look right. So for that sake, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come out of what I'm doing here and go to a slide which shows you a Cannon system that I use and you can implement for yourself, and then I'm going to come back to explain how I implemented it on this body here. If we're going to be using a Cannon system for the whole entire body, and that Cannon system is based off a one head unit, then we need to make sure that that one head unit is accurate. So what you see in front of you now is a chart that I made up some time ago, how to work out roughly what the proportion should be of the human skull. So I'm going to point you to a few things here. The first thing is we need to arrive at what is the overall height to the depth of the head. As you can see from the chart here, I've split the height of the head between the chin and the highest point of the head into eighths. Once you've got this, you can then go and take this and apply it to the depth to give us 7/8, and you can clearly see here the measurement there. So it's 1/8 shorter than the height. This will give you the overall height to depth ratio, which is really, really important. Once you've done this, you can then move on to split the unit that we've got here, this rectangular shape, into halves, both vertically and horizontally. So let's just do that now. I'm just gonna to emphasize on this a little bit more. So horizontally and vertically. This is going to give us two advantages from doing this. The first advantage is that we can work out roughly where the eyeball is. Okay, it's not always guaranteed to be spot on, but it gives us a good point of reference to start with. Once we've got this, then we can start to split the head up even further than that. Now this line, this vertical line that's going straight down, this is very, very important, because this will stop you placing the ear in the wrong place. It's very, very important that we don't do this. What I'm going to draw your attention to now is this top right hand square that I'm highlighting now. So this top right hand square that you can see, this is going to give you an area to break into a vertical and horizontal split again. And what this split will give you is it will give you two landmark points, right here and right here. And these points are where you can get the peak points of the skull. So that is the highest point of the skull and the furthest back point of the skull. So this essentially gives you this, okay? So that's very handy to be able to have that. I ran about 1/5 down, so we just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1/5 down is roughly where you'll find where the back of the skull will terminate. So the back of the skull won't go any further than this, and this happens to line up with a bony landmark point called the mastoid process. And this mastoid process is a point where we got these big neck muscles coming down called the sternocleidomastoid, okay? That's where we can determine that comes from. Once we get this, we can then also take it to the next level and work out where the chin should be. So once we've got the chin at the bottom here, we can then go up at an angle, and the chin's going to be roughly behind this center line. Okay, that's roughly where we're going to get it from. The next thing is where do we place the ear? Well, the ear is going to be placed behind the center line as we've got here. So this center line, it has to be behind there. The ear is not going to be higher than the eyebrow, and it's not going to be lower than the nose in a general sense. If this is the case, then we can clearly fit the ear roughly exactly where it should be. Roughly and exactly are two contradicting words, and that's because it does vary. I've found that it does fit exactly that on some models that I've measured, and other models it doesn't, but you can see here that it clearly does. Now when it's all fleshed out, the human head, you'll find that you'll get this point in the back of the skull here, okay, where it dips in a little bit and then it goes out towards the neck. This point will normally line up with the bottom of the nose, so it gives you a good reference point for that as well. There's just some observations that you can keep your eye on. Now if we focus our eyes now to the right, looking at the face from the front, we can see that I've split the head into 3 equal portions. This is called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is really handy to be able to have in mind, because you can quickly mark out where certain features of the face should be. And this is really good if you're creating a generic head or face before you start to mold it or manipulate it into a specific likeness of someone. And once you've followed these kind of Canon systems for a little while, you'll soon get it internalized so that you won't have to use it anymore, because it becomes part of your natural ability. So how does this work out? Well, first of all, you've got to get a unit from roughly where the hairline should be. It's normally quite high up, and I've marked it out here. And then we take another measuring unit down to the eyebrow, okay, the bone, and then what we can do is we can take from this and apply this exactly the same distance, which will bring us to the bottom of the nose. If you're having a bit of trouble getting the distance between the bottom of the nose and the eyebrow, what you can do is you can do it in reverse. You can measure from the chin. I like to normally go from the top, but if you go from the chin to here, this measurement here should be equal to the measurement between the nose and the eyebrow. You can then take this measurement to get roughly where the top of your hairline should be. This gives you the rule of thirds. So I hope that makes sense. I have actually gone a little bit further than what I was intending to do, because this video wasn't really to be a tutorial, it was just to show you my workflow. But I feel that this particular part of my workflow is essential, and I didn't really want to miss out on this, because if you don't get this right, then it can really put everything else out after this. So once you've got this down, then you can then move on into ZBrush or within any other application when you're not using a reference, and then start to map out in your mind where things should be in relation to each other. This is a chart I made up some time ago when I was studying proportional systems and anatomy, and the chart to the right really is what we're looking at now. The one to the left is just a very simplistic thing of what I've just showed you about splitting up the head between apes and 7/8. So we don't really want to be looking at this anymore. The chart on the right hand side is what we're going to be looking at now, which is how do we arrive at a body proportion of 7.5 heads, 7.5 heads. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw over the top of this and make this as brief as possible, just so you can understand what I'm talking about. So first of all, we know a head unit is from the top peak part of the skull to the chin. This would be marked as 1. And you notice that I've got these blocks down the right hand side here, and the bottom left as well, and this would indicate a head measuring unit. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and the same here. This time I'm going to write it from the bottom up. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll see why in a minute. So we start from the top, one head unit. The second head unit will bring us to the nipple line, okay, which is here. So that's the second head down. The third head down will bring us to the bottom of the rib cage. This would be basically the 12th floating rib. You can put your fingers in the side, you can feel this. And if you feel the bottom rib and you work your way around to the front of your belly, you'll find it's roughly in line with the belly button. So we can say that the third head down, 1, 2, 3, lines up with your belly button. Now this is true of most measurements when you're measuring a human being. More so when they're between 5'6" to 5'9". When you start to go to 12 foot high, 12 foot tall or more, there's a slight variation. But I will explain to you more about the variation in a minute. Now we've got the 3 heads down. If we were to go to the 4th head down, which is here, this would line up with the bottom of your genitalia. However, we're creating a 7.5 head system here, so that we have to be 3 3/4 down. So 3 3/4 lines you up to a prominent bony landmark, which is basically the widest point of your hip, and this is called the greater trochanter. The greater trochanter, if you was to look on a skeleton, it will give you a very clear definition, as you can see here, that it's actually part of the femur, but it's the widest point, and this is what people would normally say that's your kind of your hip down that area. So this is the widest point, and this is the point called the greater trochanter. The greater trochanter, incidentally, lines up with the pubic bone, and I'm going to show you this on the sculpt in a minute, or the base mesh model in ZBrush. But this will give us a 3 3/4 down. Once we got this, we can start working our way from the bottom up. So obviously we've got one head unit, and it's the second head unit which is what is important to us, because the second head unit will line up with the patella, your kneecap. The kneecap will normally be placed above this, because this is the articulation point of the lower leg as it goes back. So the patella, this would be the second leg up, second head up. The third head up is normally not anything really significant, but when you've used this Cannon system for a long time, if your femur, your upper leg bone, is way too long, you can normally tell when you're looking at your model. If you think that this is one head up from the kneecap, it should be at the upper thigh. If you find that it's not, it's the lower thigh, then it's a clear indication to you that your femur is way too long, unless you're going for a particularly tall person. So now we've got this to this point, we've got 1, 2, 3. Guess where the 3 3/4 lands us on? You guessed it. Exactly the same point is where we measured from the top down, which is our midpoint of the body at the greater trochanter, or the pubic bone. I don't want to go into any more detail about this because this would be for a later tutorial. This is really about my workflow, but you can see here we can certainly get a nice proportional system from this. So now that we've done this, let's move on to the model itself just to see how it fares up. We're back in ZBrush 4R7, and we've got the model which has been taken just to a very basic state so that I can determine the overall length of this Cannon system for the limbs. So let's just dive straight into this now. Now I'm going to explain very briefly about the measuring system that we use within ZBrush, just so that you know what I'm using here. I'm using a system in ZBrush called Transpose, and it can be activated by using the move, the scale, or the rotate. This can be used to pose the model, but it can also be used to measure with as well. The measuring preferences are found in the preferences menu, and you've got transpose units, and the ones that we're really looking at is the calibration distance and the minor tics. They're the ones we're really looking at. And you'll notice here that I've actually got these two docked at the bottom of my workspace of my UI, and they're just down here. So I'm going to be using these from now on. So first of all, we need to determine what is a unit. Well, we know a unit is going to be a head unit. So we're going to just drag from the top, holding the shift key, it will help us lock it down. And just on this outer ring here in the middle, I'm going to move it to the highest peak point. We'll just go to the front and then move this down to the chin. You can see here I've already marked it out already. But just to show you this, you just go to the calibration distance and you set this to 1, enter, and this will set it. You can see now if we move beyond this point that we've got this large tick here. So just if you can't see this, I'm just going to mark it off there. So this would be 1 unit. When you take this measuring tool beyond this, when you get down to the next unit, it will automatically give us another mark there again. So let's see how we've done. So the first unit is obviously a head. The second unit should align us up with the nipples. This can change, this can vary a little bit. You will notice that for females it will be a little bit lower sometimes, depending on the breast size and how much fat is on the breast. So it can be a bit lower, but it gives us a rough idea. The next one down would be the belly button, or the bottom of the rib cage. So we go down, which is to here. Okay, I'll just mark that off. You'll find generally that the elbow will nicely fit into this groove here. So if you were to look at the V shape that we have in here, it sort of goes down to here and then it kind of goes back out. This void area here is typically where our elbow would sit into, especially for females. Let's go down to the next unit. Next unit, we can go down and say the fourth head would be at the bottom of the groin. So you can see here that genitalia is a little bit lower than it should be. So then we can go straight to the drawer and use our move tool. And the move tool can be found in the brushes. I've got the move tools that I want and docked them down in my UI. We've got the basic move tool, which isn't going to take into account any topology. And I've got the topological move tool, which is going to help us move individual parts without affecting others. So I'm going to just use the topological move, and we just move that up slightly. I don't want nothing else on. Okay. Okay. That will do me. Now, of course, we want 3 3/4 heads down, so you can see all these minor ticks that are between each unit. Well, I'm going to change this minor ticks to 4, which is going to split it to quarters, which means that if we go to 3/4 down, go 1, 2, 3, this should bring us to the pubic bone. Okay, the pubic bone right there. The greater trochanter should also be here. It's normally a little bit lower than this. It will give us an idea whether we're on track here now. Now for the female, there is some fatty pads that are here which will generally widen out this area. Okay, just so you know this. This is our 3 3/4 point. So far we're doing pretty well. I haven't adjusted this model up to this point, so you'll see in real time what I've estimated, whether I'm quite close in or not. The next thing is the limb length, the upper limb. So we're going to go from the armpit, roughly the armpit, and it should give us 1 head unit, roughly from the armpit to the articulation point where the elbow is, which it looks like I've got it pretty spot on there. The next unit of the head should be at the wrist before it gets to the hand, and that looks looking pretty good, pretty promising. When we get to 3 heads, it should be at the tip of the finger. Wow. So it looks like I estimated this pretty spot on. But you can do this because what you're using is you're using this Canon system. And when you use this Canon system for a while, you're clearly going to find that you're going to estimate things better and better over time, because you're training your perception and you're internalizing this information to be part of you rather than you having to use these measuring systems. So indeed we do have 1, 2, 3 heads, which takes us from roughly where the armpit is down to the tip of the finger. If you want to know how big the hand should be, I found the hand, if you was to get the palm of your hand, the very bottom, put it on your chin, I find it normally comes up to round about the eyebrow or just above the eyebrow. This gives me a good idea of how big the hand should be. And the foot is normally a head, a whole head unit. So let's work our way for the lower limb. 2 heads up should bring us to the patella. So I'm happy that I got that right. I normally can see this just by looking at it if it's out, but as a beginner you won't necessarily see this. But 2 heads up will bring the patella there. The 3rd head up should bring us to kind of the upper thigh, and the 3 3/4 should land us right at the pubic bone right here. So let's see how we get on. Let's just come up. 3rd head, you can see here it's coming up to the mid thigh, so maybe the upper thigh might be a little bit too long. Let's have a look. 1, 2, 3. So you can see here 3 3/4. It's lining us up to here. What this tells me is, because it should line up with here, is that the distance between the patella, the kneecap, and this particular point here is too long. That's our thigh. It doesn't matter too much. It can be like this in real life, but if you wanted to be spot on to this system, then you can obviously shorten the distance of the femur. You can shorten this distance to get us more spot on. So how would you do this in ZBrush? Well, you hold down your control key, which applies a mask. We're going to go down just to there. Then I'm going to just use this whole line, and I'm going to move it up. I'm using the shift key, it's moving it up, and then what I'll do is I'll go down the thigh a little bit further, like that, and now it's made it shorter. I can now measure up 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3 3/4. It's taken us a little bit higher, and you can continue to work like this. I'm going to take a little bit more from the thigh. So now she will be 7.5 heads tall. Okay, that's more like it. So 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, this will give us 7.5 heads tall. How do we know this? Well, if we go all the way to the top of the skull, she's a little bit beyond that, by the looks of it. If you was to look at the top left of the screen now, it tells you that you've measured out 7.56 head units. So this basically tells you the overall height of her. So if this is the case, all you have to do is just measure again from the top down. One thing that I will mention which can throw you off is the neck length. The neck length is something that can throw everything off, because obviously you're going down to measure the limbs. There's several things that we can do. The first thing we can do is take the measurement from the top of the head and go down, and you should find that roughly 1.5 heads should line you up at the pit of the neck. which is there. And then of course you've got your clavicle. So the pit of the neck should be 1.5 heads down. And of course you've got the trapezius, the muscle at the back here, which goes up to the neck. If you find your head is looking too long, then, and you've got this measurement system, it means that your trapezius, this muscle here on top of the shoulder, is too flat, and it will make the neck look very, very long. Once you've got this down, you can then use a 2-head measurement system from the clavicle down to a pivot point. There's a point on the pelvis called the anterior superior iliac spine. Now I'm just going to show you where this is on a real skeleton. So the anterior superior iliac spine is a prominent landmark that sticks out, especially on a female, and it's right here and right there. When you look at a female pelvis, you'll see this sticking right out. A male you won't see it so much, but a female you'll definitely see this. So this is called the anterior superior iliac spine, or ASIS for short. This is a very, very important landmark, and this is something that you're going to need to know for later on, which I'm not going to go into in this video. I just wanted to mention this. So this will give us this particular point. If you look on my model, if I was to draw a line from this through, okay, you can see that I've got this bulge out there right here, and this is basically the anterior superior iliac spine, which will go up to a peak point, and then it will go down to a similar naming point called the posterior superior iliac spine, and that is the dimples that you see on your lower back. And those dimples, if I bring up our picture here, those dimples are right here. Okay, so you've got the anterior superior iliac spine at the front, as I just mentioned, and then you've got the posterior superior iliac spine. Posterior means the back, anterior means the front, superior means there's a higher up portion of it. Normally there'll be a lower one there, and iliac is because it's part of the ilium. This is the ilium portion of the pelvis, okay, and because it sticks out, it's called a spine, and that is how we get those name conventions. And you'll find that all of the anatomy, all the names of anatomy are named specifically for a reason, normally for the location or a position or the part that it's actually of, which is a different subject entirely. So once you get this down, then you can really start to work on everything else for the model. I'm not going to go into depth of this because this is really supposed to be just a workflow that I go through, but it's important that you at least understand that I have to go through this process. There's a lot of other things that I'm not going to mention in this, such as rhythms and gestures for the form, how we have high and low points, peaks and valleys within the silhouette. Very, very, very important for the a character, and how we set up the character to have a point of balance, and that would normally be by measuring from the ear hole down, and that will take you to the instep to the foot, and that will give you a good idea that you are very well balanced. And when you've got this in place, you'll find that the greater trochanter will be on this line as well. And you've got the instep to the foot aligned with the ear hole. That gives you a nice balanced character, especially if you're going to be rigging it, in which case it's very important, because you want to make sure that your upright character is upright as its basic stance. I tend to go for a pose that I'm going to be rigging. The A pose is obviously this that you're seeing. This is why it's called the A pose. Some people go for a pose where the arms are straight out, which is why it's called a T pose. Okay, I prefer to go for the A pose because it's going to aid the shoulder for its deformation. If the arm is completely down when you're rigging it, then it's got a long way to travel to the highest point of articulation. This means that a lot of deformation changes are going to happen in the geometry. If on the other hand it's in a T-pose, which is quite common, then it's got not as far to go to the highest point of articulation, but it has got a long way to go to come down to a resting point when the hands are at the sides. So I find that by adopting the A pose where it is there, that it's kind of got an equal traveling point to the highest point of articulation to the lowest point of articulation, and I find that works well for me. Another thing is you want your feet to be straight, even though in the real world you'll find that there'll be a slight rotation to the leg. I'll just show you what I mean here. So typically the feet will be pointing out a little bit. You don't want to push this too much when you're rigging. Try to keep everything as straight as possible. As far as the lower arms or the upper arms go, I tend to have a slight bend in it, and I won't have it posed as drastic as that. It will tend to be more like that, and then I would adopt a pronated lower arm. A pronated lower arm means to turn the hand down. So this will typically twist the geometry. I'll go to rotate. So typically twist the geometry down, and I would adopt a slightly different method to what I'm showing you here, but I'm not going to go through that. But typically the hands will be pronated like that, with an equal twist in the geometry as it goes down. That's the way that I would do this, like that. Although it wouldn't be as messy as that, obviously, when I'm actually doing it for real. So now I'm going to move on to the next stage in the next video of where I will take this process. And the next stage is really, really important as I've got to this stage. And by the way, at this particular stage, if you would look into the geometry tab, you'll see that I've got no subdivisional history. I don't need any. This is as far as I need to take it. I don't need to sculpt it, add any further detail. I've got the proportions in place. I've got a very, very basic anatomy in place. The next step is I would take it over into Modo, and I would make sure that it's aligned into center weld space, and I would put, and I'm going to show you this in the next video, I would put the locator or the center pivot point to the feet, and I will explain why I do that. And I'll make sure that it's scaled to real weld scale, i.e. this would be a 5'7" person, 5'7", 5'8". And this would work perfectly within Modo because the ACS kit that I'm using works in real weld. So you can literally type in 5'7", 5'8", and the bind rig will automatically be scaled correctly for this. And that is when I would bring the model back into ZBrush at the correct scale. Very, very important, that part of the stage, which I'm going to go into the next video.